All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first workshop for a new initiative by the Science-Based Targets Network and partners on the science-based targets for cities for nature. At this workshop, we'll be discussing this project in particular, as well as the approach to the project and inviting interaction from experts in the area, as well as people with lived experience, applying frameworks and setting targets for local governments. In our agenda today, we'll be introducing the project, including our project team, talking about the objectives and intended outcomes of the project, and introducing you all to the approach that we've taken so far and where we are in the project. Then we'll move on to some mural board-based interactive activities, starting with a warm-up session on what cities you are coming from, moving into the review of the preliminary results from our assessment thus far, and then going on to discuss approaches to target setting. And I'm anticipating a really lively session. We have with us today several experts from around the world. And I'd also like to add that this session is time slot A of 2. So there's a time slot B that will be starting in about 7 hours, I believe. So for any colleagues in other parts of the world, they can join us then. So we'll be thinking about them virtually as we do this particular workshop. The team that's here today, our leadership group, includes members of the Urban Biodiversity Hub, such as myself. I'm one of the co-founders. We also have today Anushri Tiwari, who will be speaking and presenting some of the slides after myself. 2 of our colleagues will also be here during the second time slot, Laura Costadone and Ricardo Gomez Zamudio. We also have our colleagues from some of the other core partners of the project from Metabolic. I will have Tomas Reif and Guillermo Decker briefly say hello so that you can recognize them in the later workshops that Metabolic will be running.
Thank you, Jennifer. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. Let's make this great and let's make cities more natural as much as we can.
Yes, hello everyone, also a small hello from me. Thank you all for joining and let's have a great session together. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas and Guy. I also would like to acknowledge Sophie Hendricks, who is the program manager for this project, but wasn't able to join us today, but I'm sure she's here in spirit, and she is with the Science-Based Targets Network, who is coordinating this project. Meanwhile, the Urban Biodiversity Hub and Metabolic Consulting are the 2 core partners of the wider consortium of groups that are involved in this project, whose logos you'll see throughout the materials in this presentation. I'll now pass this on to my colleague Anushri Tiwari, who will introduce herself and then move us straight into the objectives and the introduction to the project.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining. Thank you, Jennifer. This is Anushri from India. I'm the South Asian region leads at UBHub. Moving on to the next slide. So the objective of this framework is to create a target setting guidance for the cities that are seeking to improve their impact on nature. The outcomes that we are looking at and we are co-building and working towards is a PDF guidebook which is for the target setting guidance for the local governments, as well as prepare a pilot testing of one of the thematic areas. So the framework and indices for the cities and nature, as you can see in the diagram, the steps are assess, then we have interpret and prioritize, measure, set, and disclose, and then that's how we will be developing the targets. The framework builds on looking at cross connectivity between the SBT for nature for business and SBT for climate for cities. So what we are looking and preparing and working towards is the SBT for nature for cities. The opportunities of this program, which is SBTs for City for Nature, is that the cities currently are in need for a guidance so as to understand how can they choose among what is lacking in their own areas. Secondly, we have the application. We already have very many existing frameworks. So how can we pick up and how can we utilize those frameworks in a productive manner? And thirdly, how do we assess and understand how can we set feasible yet meaningful targets? So how we're responding is to understand and integrate the existing approaches that are already in practice, to look at the guidance, the flexibility of the guidance in terms of their applicability, then look at the science-based approaches that they are suggesting, simplifying the process, and lastly, legitimizing the city goals, wherein we are trying to bridge the theory and practice together. The successful outcome for this guidance is to see how this can be applied as a pilot. And the guidance would consist of thematic areas, which we will be discussing further during the mural and the activities which are planned ahead. Then thirdly is to understand the city's impact on nature, which is the primary goal of this framework, and look at elements which are comprehensive indicators of what urban nature is all about. The final product will clearly show these elements which deserve attention and will be further worked out in the SBTN's next iteration for cities. The engagement timeline looks like this. We are in the first workshop here, so thank you for all for joining in. Shortly after this, we would be circulating a survey where we would be gaining some understanding from you so as to how can we go ahead and get some feedback. Then we have another second workshop planned between May and July, and the third workshop somewhere in September this year. The framework assessment methods, or what we have used as a process for understanding, is first we developed an inventory where we have identified some frameworks. Then a coding protocol was developed. An initial review was completed, after which we identified themes from this framework, and a second assessment was undertaken where we revised the protocol, and finally a scoring was done, and we have identified 5 frameworks which require additional attention. We will be sharing these results during this workshop, and we have also enlisted the assessment framework on the right side, wherein we have identified 20 themes, and the relevance of the target setting guidance and indicator selection being the second one, and the third one being the feasibility. So first one is the thematic comprehensiveness, the relevance, and the feasibility. These are the 3 primary criteria which we have identified to understand which all frameworks to be prioritized. So these are the 20-odd frameworks that we have looked at, and this is the inventory. We will not be going through all of them right now, but the ones which are bold in orange are the ones which will be explored in detail, because they performed well and in the 3 criteria that I mentioned earlier. So for an example, IUCN's Urban Nature Index, this is just an example of one of the frameworks that we looked at. So the UNI, which is organized in 6 thematic areas consisting of each containing 5 indicator topics, so totally 30 indicators per se. The assessment of the summary of the UNI comes out as follows. So the thematic comprehensiveness, as you can see, we have looked at one theme being the climate and nature, where the UNI is performing well in GHG mitigation, nature-based trade-offs, but doesn't have much going on in adaptation, nature-based mitigation, renewables, and energy. Please make note that the orange, which has been given here, shows that there were no indicators or targets which were there in this framework. And the black one shows that these targets were present there. So the second theme is habitat and connectivity, where UNI is performing well in land use and sprawl, protection of natural areas, and so on. Third thematic being human well-being and equity, and fourthly being the consumption and pollution. So apart from thematic comprehensiveness, we also looked at the relevance to the target setting, where we assessed whether there were indicators present for nature, and there were targets for nature which were measurable, and there was a target setting guidance given for the users, which provided details so as to allow the users to understand how can they measure or how can they set targets with time or qualitatively. Now, lastly, we have the scale, where global connections was one of the criteria which was important, just to understand whether these targets were linked to any international treaties like GBF or SDG, for example, and local applicability in terms of whether this is applicable for the local government or for the municipality it's looking at.